So this would be a big revenue raiser. Where are lawmakers likely to use that money?
Well, it's not certain. It's far from certain that this will actually happen. President Trump had started with a 15% corporate tax rate. He moved up to 20%. 20% seems to be a red line for a lot of members of the House and the Senate on the Republican side. So it's far from clear they'll actually go for this 22%. There are two senators that I think would have been very happy to have heard President Trump say this before the Senate vote, Marco Rubio and Mike Lee, who had proposed to raise the corporate tax rate slightly to just under 21% to finance an expansion of the child tax credit. The president had drawn a red line at 20% at the time. He seems to be flexible on it now. It remains to be seen what, if anything, congressional Republicans will do with that.
Sahil, you're up there on Capitol Hill. Who's driving the boat at this point? We have to go to conference committee. It has to come back to the two houses. Is it the White House? Is it the House? Is it the Senate? Who's really driving this ship?
Two people, Paul Ryan in the House and Mitch McConnell in the Senate, the Republican leaders in each respective chamber. It's on them now to pick a list of conferees in the House and in the Senate to meet to discuss what happens next, how they hash out one piece of legislation that resolves the differences between the House version and the Senate version that can get 218 votes in the House and 50 in the Senate. They have very little margin for error in the Senate. So the expectation is that the final version is going to look more like the Senate version than the House. We've seen in both chambers not a single Democrat get on board with this, so Republicans have to do this all by themselves.
At least, especially when it comes to the repeal of the Obama individual mandate, the House Republicans wouldn't really have too much of an issue of repealing it as the Senate bill does.
Right. So this was an issue that was excluded from the House bill because Republicans there were afraid that it would mess up the Senate's plans. It turns out the Senate Republicans were on board with it. 51 of them voted for the bill that included repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate. House Republicans are likely to include that for two reasons. Number one, most of them support repeal of this provision. And secondly, it raises about $300 billion in revenue in the long term. That's critical to making this bill fit within the budget parameters. This could, however, create some problems with moderate Republican House members who were wary of efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act but are supportive of this tax bill. It could also create some issues here in the Senate on the final go-around, the final package with Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who has insisted on stabilization measures to prevent premiums from spiking in the healthcare markets if this is repealed. That is far from certain that the House will take up those ACA stabilization measures. So a few kinks left to be resolved here.